March 15th, 44 BC. Morning light filters through the porticos of the Theater of Pompey in Rome. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, arrives for what he believes is a routine meeting of the Senate. He steps from his litter and strides toward the Senate chamber, surrounded by senators and confidants. Unbeknownst to Caesar, among those accompanying him are men who have spent weeks plotting his death. Inside the Curia of Pompey, about 60 men take their places. The stone walls ring with the shuffling of sandals and the low murmur of senators. Light filters in through high windows, illuminating motes of dust in the air. For a moment, it's calm and almost reverent as Caesar greets the assembly. These men know exactly what is about to happen. They have rehearsed it in whispers and secret meetings. They clutch concealed daggers beneath their flowing togas. Caesar enters and takes his seat on a gilded chair at the front, used to mark his special status. The conspirators subtly maneuver to encircle him. One of them is Decimus Brutus, a trusted ally who dined with Caesar just last night. Caesar has no idea that Decimus, a man he considers almost a son, is part of the deadly circle tightening around him. The air is tense but outwardly respectful. To Caesar, it seems like any other Senate session. He does not notice how certain senators glance at one another, trading the slightest nods. He doesn't see the sweat beading on Gaius Cassius Longinus's brow or hear the quickened breathing of Casca behind him. Why would he suspect anything? These are senators, not soldiers. Many are his longtime friends or protégés. They call him Father of the Fatherland. They have come to honor him, so he believes. Moments later, the routine meeting explodes into the most famous assassination in history. Daggers flash in the dim chamber. Caesar is slammed with a flurry of blows, stabbers pressing in on every side. He struggles to rise, shocked and enraged, but he is hemmed in by a wall of bodies and blades. The senators he thought loyal are plunging knives into him. 23 stab wounds in all. Caesar collapses in a pool of his own blood at the base of a statue of Pompey the Great, the rival he defeated in the Civil War. In an instant, Rome's dictator lies dead on the marble floor, and the Roman Republic is forever changed. This is not just the story of a murder. It's the story of a conspiracy that hoped to save a republic and instead doomed it. How did it come to this? To find out, we must journey back weeks before that fateful Senate meeting to understand why dozens of prominent Romans decided that assassination was their only option. We will slip into secret gatherings in lamplit villas, listen to whispers of treason, and witness the conspirators forging their dangerous pact. We will stand with Julius Caesar on the morning of the Ides of March, feeling the chill of omens and the weight of destiny. And we will follow the aftermath, the chaos, the speeches, the riots, and the rise of an emperor from the ashes of a shattered republic. Close your eyes and travel back to the final days of the Roman Republic. The year is 44 BC, and Rome is at a crossroads. In quiet backrooms, a band of senators is planning the perfect murder of the most powerful man alive. They believe it will save the Republic. They are about to unleash events that will instead destroy it. By late February 44 BC, Julius Caesar had ruled Rome as a de facto king in all but name for nearly 2 years. To understand why some of his closest colleagues decided he must die, we need to recall how Caesar rose to such heights, and why the very idea of one-man rule so terrified the Roman Senate. Caesar was born around 100 BC into the ancient Julian clan. Though of noble lineage, his family was not especially wealthy or influential at the time. From a young age, Julius Caesar was bold, charismatic, and fiercely ambitious. An early episode showed his audacity. At age 25, while sailing in the Aegean Sea, he was kidnapped by Cilician pirates. When the pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver, Caesar laughed at them for undervaluing him and insisted they ask for 50. During his captivity, which lasted over a month, Caesar maintained a haughty, almost friendly dominance over his captors, joining in their games, shushing them when he wished to sleep, even composing poetry and speeches, and requesting the pirates listen. They indulged this confident Roman aristocrat, amused by his boldness. He joked that after his release, he would raise a fleet and crucify them. The pirates took it as gallows humor, yet Caesar meant it. Once the ransom was paid and he was freed, Caesar immediately outfitted ships, pursued the pirates, and caught them still at their anchorage. True to his word, he had them crucified, though in a gesture of mercy, he ordered their throats cut first to lessen their suffering. He even made sure the executions were done swiftly, because he remembered his promise to treat them not so harshly in jest. This early adventure revealed two key traits: Caesar's daring and his ruthlessness toward those who crossed him. Caesar's ambition was boundless. Once, while serving as a young officer in Spain, he came across a statue of Alexander the Great. Alexander had died at 32, having conquered the world from Greece to India. Caesar was about the same age and had not achieved anything comparable yet. He reportedly broke into tears in front of Alexander's statue, lamenting, "At my age, Alexander had conquered so many nations, and I have done nothing." It was a telling glimpse into his drive to make a mark in history. After returning to Rome, Caesar climbed the political ladder rapidly in the 60s BC. He was an excellent orator, a populist politician who cultivated the support of the common people with feasts, public games, and promises of reform. He famously gave lavish gladiatorial shows and spent huge sums, often money lent by Crassus, the richest man in Rome, to win public office and influence. His debts were enormous, but he gambled that power would reimburse him, a gamble that paid off. Caesar's ascendancy was no accident. Earlier, in 60 BC, he had forged a political alliance with Rome's two other most influential figures: Gnaeus Pompey Magnus, Pompey the Great, Rome's celebrated general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's wealthiest man. This informal pact, later called the First Triumvirate, allowed the three men to dominate Roman politics through combined influence. In 59 BC, Caesar served as consul, the highest elected office in Rome, with the backing of Pompey and Crassus. During that consulship, he pushed through a series of popular laws, often over the objections of the Senate, sometimes using intimidation and bypassing norms. He secured land for Pompey's veterans and tax reforms benefiting Crassus's clients. He showed then that he was willing to break with tradition and use aggressive tactics to achieve his aims. Conservative senators like Cato the Younger and Cicero watched Caesar's rise with alarm, perceiving in him the seeds of tyranny even before he held any extraordinary power. By the end of his consulship, Caesar had made as many enemies as friends among the elite. When his term ended, Caesar left Rome to govern the provinces of Gaul, modern France and Belgium. What followed were the Gallic Wars, 58 to 50 BC. For 8 years, Caesar led Roman legions through Gaul, conquering tribe after tribe. He bridged the Rhine and raided into Germany. He built fleets and invaded Britannia, Britain, twice. His commentaries on the Gallic War recount these campaigns with a mix of modesty and flair. Always casting himself in the third person, Caesar defeated the enemy. But the Roman people devoured these dispatches, and Caesar's glory only grew. He amassed wealth from war booty and slaves, sent back spectacular treasures to Rome, and most importantly, won the undying loyalty of his soldiers. To them, Caesar was not just a general. He was a meal ticket, a patron, nearly a demigod. The Roman Senate, however, grew increasingly uneasy with Caesar's accumulating power and martial fame. By 50 BC, with Gaul fully subdued, some in the Senate, led by Caesar's old ally turned rival Pompey and conservative figures like Cato, demanded that Caesar relinquish his command and return to Rome as a private citizen. They feared he'd use his army to seize control. Caesar, for his part, felt he had been wronged. He had extended his governorship legally, and believed his enemies in the Senate were maneuvering to destroy him if he returned without the protection of his legions. A crisis ensued. In January of 49 BC, Caesar made the fateful decision to defy the Senate's order. With one legion, the 13th, he approached the small river Rubicon, which marked the boundary of his province. Roman law forbade a general from bringing troops into Italy proper. To cross the Rubicon with his army was treason, essentially a declaration of civil war. Caesar paused, aware of the gravity of what he was about to do. According to one account, he then declared, "Alea jacta est," the die is cast, and led his soldiers across. By crossing the Rubicon, Julius Caesar plunged the Roman Republic into civil war. The war pitted Caesar's forces against the senatorial armies led by Pompey. It ranged across the Mediterranean world. Caesar swiftly advanced to Rome. Pompey and many senators fled Italy, then chased Pompey to Greece. In August 48 BC, at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece, Caesar won a decisive victory against a larger Pompeian army. Pompey fled to Egypt, only to be murdered upon arrival by courtiers of the Ptolemaic pharaoh, a tragic end that Caesar reportedly lamented. Pompey's severed head was presented to him, and Caesar wept at the sight of his one-time friend and son-in-law's fate. Caesar, arriving in Egypt, became embroiled in the famous affair with Queen Cleopatra VII. He took the Egyptian queen's side in a dynastic dispute, eventually defeating her brother. Caesar and Cleopatra became lovers. She bore him a son, Caesarion. Caesar lingered in Egypt into 47 BC, enjoying the luxury of the Alexandrian court and a passionate romance that scandalized many Romans. Cleopatra later even visited Rome and was openly acknowledged by Caesar as his consort, something that fueled rumors and discontent in the capital. After Egypt, Caesar continued campaigning. He swept through the Middle East, winning a quick battle in Pontus so swiftly he proclaimed, "Veni, vidi, vici." I came, I saw, I conquered. Then defeated the remaining Pompeian loyalists in North Africa in 46 BC. By 45 BC, after a final victory in Spain against Pompey's sons, the civil war was effectively over. Caesar was the unrivaled master of the Roman world. He returned to Rome in triumph, literally. He celebrated an unprecedented 4 triumphs, grand victory parades, in the span of a few weeks, for his victories in Gaul, Egypt, Asia, and Africa. The city feasted and marveled at the displays of riches and captives. Caesar's soldiers adored him, and the people of Rome, by and large, loved him for the prosperity and entertainments he provided. He was generous in victory, too. Famously, he pardoned many of his former enemies instead of executing or exiling them. Men who had fought against him, Brutus, Cassius, Cicero, and others, were not only spared, but often given offices in his new regime. This policy of clementia, mercy, was politically shrewd, aimed at reconciliation, but some of those pardoned, nursing wounded pride or principled republican sentiments, resented that they owed their lives to Caesar's benevolence. With the last of his opponents crushed, Caesar assumed supreme power. The Senate, cowed but still functioning, voted him a dizzying array of honors. Dictator, a special emergency office, initially for 10 years, then for life. Imperator as a permanent title. Pater Patria, father of the fatherland. And perhaps most unsettling, they even allowed his statue to stand among those of the ancient kings of Rome. Coins were minted bearing Caesar's likeness, an act of quasi-monarchical propaganda never before done for a living Roman. He dressed in the purple and ivory robes traditionally worn by the ancient kings of Rome. He took a special golden chair in the Senate and spoke first on all matters. He was essentially reshaping the state around himself. Rome had been a republic for nearly 500 years, since the founding of the Republic in 509 BC, when the last king was expelled. That founding moment itself was born from an act of tyrannicide. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, had been overthrown after his son's heinous abuse of a noblewoman named Lucretia. Lucius Junius Brutus, the very ancestor of Marcus Brutus, led the revolt that expelled the Tarquin monarchy. Ever since, the very word rex, king, was anathema in Rome. No matter how powerful a politician became, to style oneself king was unacceptable. The Senate and magistrates were designed to check any one man from supremacy. Yet now Caesar had accumulated offices and honors that effectively made him king in all but name. To many traditionalists, this was a horrifying development. The Republic's old elite, the optimates, saw their worst nightmares coming true. A single man commanding the armies, the treasury, and legislation. Some of Caesar's behavior exacerbated their fears. On one occasion, a delegation of senators came to present him with decrees and honors. Caesar received them seated and did not rise, a shocking breach of etiquette. Some say he was unwell, others that he was arrogantly testing them. The senators left insulted. In another incident, at the public festival of the Lupercalia in February 44 BC, Caesar sat on the rostra in a ceremonial golden chair. Mark Antony, his loyal co-consul, approached and, in a rehearsed gesture, offered him a diadem, a white ribbon symbolizing a monarch's crown. A few in the crowd clapped, but most fell silent, uncertain or disapproving. Caesar waved the diadem away, and the crowd cheered in relief. Antony tried to place it on Caesar's head again. Caesar refused more firmly and ordered it dedicated to Jupiter instead, saying, "Jupiter alone is king of the Romans." The people roared approval at Caesar's apparent humility. But to the senators, this looked like a piece of theater, as if Caesar were testing the public's willingness to accept him as king. Rumors flew that he longed for a crown. Perhaps he would take it on his upcoming campaign, to be acclaimed abroad as King of Rome and return with that title. There were even whispers, almost certainly false, yet indicative of the alarm, that Caesar planned to marry Cleopatra, who was still in Rome under Caesar's protection, and elevate their son Caesarion as his heir, which would fuse Rome and Egypt under one family. The notion of a foreign queen and a half-Egyptian prince having sway in Rome sent shudders through the populace and nobility alike. Wild rumors claimed Caesar might move the capital of the empire to Alexandria or to the ancient city of Troy in Asia Minor. Romans, prone to superstition and gossip, stewed in these anxieties. Meanwhile, Caesar prepared for a grand campaign that he believed would secure his legacy definitively. He planned to depart Rome in late March 44 BC for the east to fight the Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival in the Middle East, and avenge the humiliating defeat Rome had suffered at Parthian hands years before, when Crassus was killed at Carrhae. This campaign was expected to last several years. Caesar had already begun making arrangements, appointing magistrates to govern in his absence, drafting plans for the distribution of land to veterans, and even adjusting the succession of offices for several years to come. Some feared that if he left for so long with the best legions, he would return an invincible monarch, if he returned at all. Others whispered that Caesar's departure was actually what the conspirators were waiting for. If he left, they would never get a better chance to restore the old order. By early February 44 BC, tension crackled in the political class of Rome. The common people still largely loved Caesar. He provided games, debt relief, and grain doles. He expanded citizenship rights. The city's lower classes felt they had a champion, but many senators felt increasingly sidelined and alarmed. The liberators, as some would later call themselves, meaning liberators, began to coalesce, an opposition in secret. The conspiracy did not form all at once. It grew little by little, nurtured by fear, idealism, and personal grudges. It started with two men, Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus. On the evening of February 22, 44 BC, Gaius Cassius visited Marcus Brutus at Brutus's home in Rome. Cassius was a lean, hard-eyed man in his late 40s. A talented general and a shrewd, if somewhat bitter, politician. He had been a supporter of Pompey during the Civil War, commanding part of Pompey's fleet. After Pompey's defeat, Cassius surrendered to Caesar, who pardoned him. Caesar even elevated Cassius to important posts afterward, trying to win his loyalty. But Cassius never forgot that he had been on the side of the Republic against Caesar's usurpation of power. He resented living in Caesar's shadow and perhaps felt slighted that Caesar's favor often went to others. Cassius was known for his intense, piercing gaze, and as Shakespeare later immortalized, had a lean and hungry look. Marcus Junius Brutus, host to Cassius that evening, was about 40 and widely respected as a man of principle, learning, and honor. He traced his lineage to the very founder of the Republic, Lucius Junius Brutus of 509 BC. Brutus's family heritage was practically a byword for liberty. His ancestor had slain a tyrant king, and people had long joked or hoped that if Rome ever had another king, a Brutus would arise to kill him. Brutus himself was philosophical, serious, and magnanimous in reputation. Notably, Brutus was also a close friend, some said almost an adopted son, of Julius Caesar. He had fought on Pompey's side as well, at Pharsalus, but Caesar forgave him and brought him into the fold, making him a praetor for 44 BC. There was even a rumor, likely false but telling, that Brutus was Caesar's illegitimate son, because many years earlier, Caesar had been lovers with Brutus's mother Servilia. Though the timing makes that impossible, Brutus was in his late 30s, Caesar only 15 years older, the rumor reflected the close affection Caesar had for Brutus. That night in Brutus's lamplit study, Cassius carefully probed his brother-in-law. Cassius had married Brutus's sister. Thus they were family. Cassius spoke in low, urgent tones. Perhaps he began obliquely. "Have you noticed how the people of Rome look to you, Brutus? Your name carries a great responsibility." Brutus likely understood immediately. Around this time, anonymous notes had been appearing on Brutus's tribunal chair and on statues of his ancestors with messages like, "Oh, that we had a Brutus now," and "Brutus, awake." Such graffiti hinted that some wanted Brutus to emulate his ancestor and rid Rome of a would-be king. Brutus was torn. He loved the Republic and its ideals, liberty, shared power, the rule of law, and he saw Caesar accumulating powers that threatened those ideals. But he also felt gratitude and perhaps love for Caesar the man, who had spared his life and honored him. That evening, Cassius appealed to Brutus's patriotism and his sense of history. The details of their dialogue are lost, but later accounts from Plutarch and others reconstruct it in spirit. Cassius, voice intense. "Rome is in peril. We have expelled kings for 5 centuries, and we cannot suffer one now, not even if he calls himself dictator instead of Rex. You know this, Brutus. The people expect it of you. You, descendant of the great Brutus. You whose very name is liberty." Brutus likely furrowed his brow. Perhaps he responded with concern. "I fear Caesar does aim at kingship, but what would you have me do? He is as a father to me, and the people love him." Cassius leaned forward, whispering fiercely, "They love him now, perhaps, but what of their children? Shall we hand down to posterity a Rome enslaved? Caesar's clemency, his shows, bread and circuses, it blinds them. But if he crowns himself, the Republic is finished, will be nothing but his subjects. Is that what we want? To bow and say your majesty to a mortal man?" Brutus's silence was telling. Cassius pressed on, invoking their revered ancestors, invoking the oath their forefathers swore never to allow a king in Rome. He likely brought up specific grievances: the incident with the diadem, the statues, the dismissal of the tribunes who objected to calling Caesar Rex. Indeed, in January, 2 tribunes had removed a diadem from Caesar's statue, and Caesar had angrily had them stripped of office, a blatant act against the representatives of the people. Cassius had his own personal bitterness too. Caesar had, in Cassius's view, unjustly favored Brutus over him on several occasions. Once, Caesar had overridden an election, so Brutus would get a prestigious office instead of Cassius. Caesar reportedly told friends he trusted Brutus's integrity more. That stung Cassius. Cassius may have played on that. I know you love him, Brutus. I once did too. But Caesar's hubris grows. Today he did not rise in the Senate for us. Tomorrow he may sit on a throne. And what then? Will our noble Brutus stand idle? Brutus had questions. How could it be done? Who else shared these fears? Cassius likely named a few. Casca feels as we do. Cimber. Trebonius, even he, a former legate of Caesar, is disillusioned. Many will stand with us if only Brutus will lead. They spoke for hours, weighing the morality and the risks. Brutus was an idealist. He did not take lightly the idea of murder, especially of someone who had shown him personal kindness. But Cassius was persuasive and relentless. He framed it not as murder, but as a sacrifice, tyrannicide in the name of restoring liberty. In the end, Brutus agreed that Caesar must be stopped if he continued on his path toward kingship. By the night's end, it was decided they would act for the good of Rome. Brutus's nod, or words of assent, sealed the conspiracy at its highest level. From that point on, there was no turning back for either man. That night, a pact was struck. The next days were spent quietly recruiting and organizing. Brutus and Cassius knew they needed many co-conspirators, enough to surround and kill Caesar, who was a formidable man physically and always had a few attendants or friends around, and enough to stand collectively responsible so that no single person would be blamed as a lone assassin. They believed the act must seem to be, by the Senate as a body, an expression of the Republic's will, not just a couple of malcontents. Their recruitment strategy was careful and methodical. They preferred men of their own generation, late 30s to 40s, neither hot-headed youths who might blunder nor feeble elders. They sought out fellow senators, especially those who had been on Pompey's side or otherwise marginalized by Caesar's dominance, and also a few of Caesar's longtime officers who might have become disillusioned with him. Personal connections were key. They approached friends or friends of friends in private, testing their sentiments. They used careful, innocuous questions to feel out a potential ally's stance. Rather than blurting treason, one might ask philosophically, is it noble for a man to risk himself to remove a great evil from the state? Or, what would our ancestors think if Rome were to have a king again? If the other person responded with concern about Caesar's power or spoke fondly of Republican ideals, they would draw closer. If he reacted poorly, they'd drop the subject as a mere hypothetical. One recruit brought in early was Gaius Trebonius. Trebonius had been one of Caesar's generals, serving with distinction in Gaul and the Civil War. Caesar had rewarded him with a provincial command and a consulship scheduled in a few years. Trebonius was a beneficiary of Caesar's favor. However, Trebonius had his disappointments. He disliked how Caesar had sometimes advanced younger men over him. And perhaps he was uneasy with Caesar's monarchical behavior. Cassius and Brutus found Trebonius receptive. He joined their cause. Trebonius's importance would become clear later. He agreed to the crucial task of keeping Mark Antony, Caesar's strongest ally, out of the way at the key moment of the assassination. Lucius Tullius Cimber was another early conspirator. A senator whose brother had been banished by Caesar, Cimber had a grievance. He had begged Caesar to recall his brother from exile to no avail. Personal grudge and offended family honor made him a willing participant. Cimber was brash and enthusiastic. The conspirators decided that on the chosen day, Cimber would be the one to initiate the attack by presenting a petition to Caesar, again pleading for his brother's pardon, and then grabbing Caesar's toga as a pretext. Publius Servilius Casca and Gaius Servilius Casca, two brothers, were recruited not long after. The Casca brothers had both served in Caesar's administration, but like others, they chafed under what they viewed as his tyranny. Publius Casca, the elder, was taciturn and determined. It was agreed that he would strike the first blow, a dangerous and unenviable honor, requiring great nerve. Casca agreed to do it. Another important name was Decius Junius Brutus Albinus, often just called Decimus Brutus, to distinguish him from Marcus Brutus. They were distant cousins. Decimus was one of Caesar's closest friends and trusted generals. He had served with Caesar for years, commanding ships in Gaul and leading troops in the Civil War. Caesar trusted Decimus so much that, in Caesar's will, written before events, Decimus was named among the secondary heirs and as a guardian for Octavius, Caesar's grandnephew. Caesar once said he had great love for Decimus, nearly on par with Brutus. If loyalty were expected from anyone, it would be Decimus. And yet, in early March, when Cassius and Brutus approached him, Decimus joined the conspiracy. Modern historians debate why. Possibly Decimus felt slighted that Caesar had recently favored the young Octavius with honors, presaging that the teenager, Octavius was only 18, might outrank seasoned commanders like Decimus. Or maybe Decimus, like others, truly feared Caesar would destroy the Republic. Ancient writers suggest he was torn, but ultimately believed Rome needed to be saved from Caesar's ambitions. Whatever his motive, Decimus's participation was a turning point. With Decimus on board, the conspirators gained a valuable asset. He had Caesar's ear and absolute trust, and he commanded a troop of gladiators which could later be used as a private security force. Also, if Caesar were hesitant to attend the Senate on a given day, Decimus could persuade him, a role no one else could perform as well. Other notable conspirators included Pacuvius Labeo, who was brought in after Brutus tested him with a philosophical query. On March 2nd, Brutus casually asked Labeo, "Do you believe it is wise for a man to put himself into danger if it means overcoming evil or foolish men?" Labeo, catching Brutus's drift, answered at once that yes, it was the most honorable course. His eagerness to oppose tyranny made him a quick addition, and Labeo in turn helped recruit others. Fanning the flames among like-minded senators, Minucius Basileus, another former supporter of Caesar who felt wronged, Caesar had once jokingly or not implied Basileus was cruel to his slaves and nicknamed him for it, joined too. Basileus harbored ill will. One anecdote says in a moment of anger he had called Caesar king to his face as an insult. He needed little convincing to join a plot against Caesar. Pontius Aquila was also part of the group. He was a tribune of the people whom Caesar had publicly humiliated. Once, when Caesar was riding through Rome, Pontius did not stand to show respect. Caesar halted, barked, "Come, Aquila, do you want the Republic back?" in front of the crowd, mocking him. Aquila's pride was wounded deeply. He joined the conspirators to even the score. Notably, they decided not to involve the famous orator Marcus Tullius Cicero. Both Cassius and Brutus respected Cicero. He was a staunch Republican who openly lamented the loss of the old order. They knew he hated Caesar's dictatorship. But Cicero was in his 60s, long past his days of bold action. He was cautious by nature, a planner and thinker, not a man of sudden moves. They worried that Cicero might overcomplicate their plans or even inadvertently leak word of it. Cicero was known to be talkative, so they kept him out of the loop. Cicero remained unaware of the brewing conspiracy. He would only learn of it when daggers were drawn. Another whom they considered but ultimately excluded was Mark Antony, Caesar's 39-year-old co-consul and loyal right-hand man. Early in their scheming, some conspirators wondered if Antony could be turned. After all, Antony was a known reveler and had sometimes clashed with Caesar's policies. But Trebonius revealed that the previous year he had privately floated an idea to Antony about opposing Caesar, and Antony had flatly refused to betray his friend. Thus, it was settled. Antony was not to be trusted as an ally. In fact, many in the group argued he should be killed along with Caesar, lest he rally troops in vengeance. Cassius initially favored killing Antony too, as well as perhaps a few other of Caesar's key supporters. But Brutus overruled that. He argued passionately that they must be seen as liberators, not butchers. surgeons cutting out one diseased limb to heal the Republic, not slaughterers on a political purge. Our purpose is to kill tyranny, not the tyrant's friends, he said. Brutus convinced them only Caesar would be marked for death. Mark Antony and others would be spared. This would prove perhaps their critical mistake, but to Brutus it was essential in order to keep their deed morally pure and palatable to the public. By the Ides of March, as many as 60 to 80 individuals were involved in the conspiracy, though not all in equal depth. Some were privy to every detail. Others only generally knew something would happen. The core group met several times in secret to hammer out the plan. They considered different places and times to strike. Some suggested attacking Caesar on the Via Sacra, the sacred road he walked daily. Others thought to do it during one of the upcoming elections when Caesar would be on the Pons bridge overseeing voting, perhaps pushing him off the bridge to a group of armed men below. Another idea: assault him during a gladiatorial show when weapons were commonplace, and Caesar might not have armed guards near, because only gladiators carry weapons at games. But each of these had complications. Finally, they settled on a plan that was simple, bold, and symbolically resonant. They would kill Caesar in the Senate House itself during a session of the Senate. Only senators would be around him, no soldiers. Caesar, notably, had dismissed his formal Spanish bodyguard earlier to show trust in the city. It would be in full view of political peers, almost a public act of state rather than a furtive murder. And it could be framed as the Senate defending the Republic. The chosen date was an upcoming session. The Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC. The Senate was scheduled to meet that day in the Curia of Pompey, a hall attached to Pompey's theater, because the usual Senate house in the Forum was under renovation, ironically, being rebuilt by Caesar's orders. 2 days before the Ides, on March 13th, a final meeting of the key conspirators was held, possibly at Cassius's house or perhaps Brutus's. By now, about 60 people were firmly in. Cassius, the most militarily experienced, addressed them. He knew that once they struck, if they failed or even hesitated, they would all be hunted down. Thus, he reportedly proposed an oath, or at least a grim understanding. If their plot was discovered at any point, or if they were interrupted during the act, they must all be prepared to draw their knives on themselves, to commit suicide rather than be captured and forced to beg for mercy. Better to die free, Romans, than live in chains, he said. The conspirators solemnly agreed. They were each essentially writing their own death warrant should anything go wrong. The night before the planned assassination, March 14th, Caesar was at a dinner party. The host was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, Caesar's master of horse, deputy, and a trusted ally who commanded troops in the city. It was an enjoyable evening in a luxurious villa, full of good food and wine. Among the guests were high-ranking officials, notably Decimus Brutus was present, and perhaps quietly trading meaningful glances with another conspirator present, maybe Trebonius or Cimber. As they reclined on couches after the meal, the conversation turned philosophical. Someone asked, "What is the best kind of death one could experience?" They went around offering thoughts. When it came to Caesar, he answered, perhaps after a short pause, a sudden one. A quick, unexpected death. That, he said, was preferable. Decimus Brutus must have felt a chill or a surge of anxiety on hearing those words. Caesar had unwittingly pronounced his own ideal fate, and indeed, within hours he would meet it, thanks in part to Decimus's own treachery. If Decimus betrayed any reaction, it wasn't recorded. The conspirators among the guests kept their poker faces. That same night, Marcus Brutus was at home with his wife Portia Catonis, the daughter of Cato the Younger. Portia was intelligent and observant. She had noticed her husband's distress and secretive behaviors in recent days. She suspected Brutus was burdened by something serious. After dinner, she implored him to confide in her. At first, Brutus demurred. It was too dangerous to tell anyone, even his beloved wife. Portia, in an extraordinary display of determination, took a drastic step to prove her trustworthiness. Some accounts say she had secretly wounded herself in the thigh earlier that day with a knife, enduring intense pain in silence. Now she revealed the bandage or the fresh wound to Brutus. She said that if she could endure that pain stoically, she could surely endure keeping his dangerous secret. This shocking demonstration moved Brutus deeply. He raised her from the ground, for she likely knelt, pleading, and assured her she was worthy to hear the noblest secrets. He then confessed that a plot was underway to kill Caesar, and that he was at the center of it. Portia, upon hearing it, trembled and wept, not out of disagreement, but out of fear for her husband's life and the immense weight of what he intended to do. She swore to be silent and support him. That night, Portia scarcely slept, her heart heavy with what the morrow would bring. Cassius, too, had a restless night. He paced in his home, reviewing the plan in his mind, worrying over every detail. One source says he even spoke with his wife and shared some hints of what was to come. She urged him to abandon the plot if it seemed too perilous. Cassius responded that it was more perilous not to act. If Caesar became a king, then he, Cassius, would rather die than live under a monarch. Finally, likely toward dawn, Cassius managed a little sleep, perhaps after praying to whichever gods might assist a band of tyrant killers. He was not notably superstitious. He followed the philosophy of Epicurus, which doubted omens. But that night, Cassius found himself glancing at the dark sky, murmuring a prayer for success. The chosen day dawned at last, the Ides of March. From the beginning, it was filled with omens and portents, or so later everyone remembered it. Ancient writers collected a catalog of supernatural warnings said to have occurred in the lead-up to this day. Some we know are true, like the soothsayer's warning. Others might be embroidered by legend. One by one, these signs had appeared. The soothsayer. Spurina's warning. Some weeks earlier, a haruspex, a priest who examines animal entrails for omens, named Spurina, had performed a sacrifice for Caesar. He warned that the gods indicated a great danger to Caesar that would not pass until the Ides of March. Caesar had actually been warned, beware the Ides of March. On the morning of March 15th itself, Spurina repeated his caution, urging Caesar to stay on guard that entire day. Bizarre natural signs. According to Plutarch and Suetonius, a host of weird occurrences were reported. A wren, or kingbird, flew into the forum and was torn apart by a flock of other birds, taken to symbolize Caesar, the kingly bird, destroyed by many. Caesar's own favorite war horses, which he had let roam free after crossing the Rubicon, were seen weeping, yes, apparently crying, and refusing to eat. It was said that the night before, the dead had risen from their graves and roamed the streets, or that ghostly voices were heard on the winds. Some claimed a lioness gave birth in the city, a bad omen, and that lightning struck or strange lights were seen in the sky. The very weather seemed unsettled with sudden storms. Romans were extremely superstitious, and these tales, true or not, spread a sense of dread. Caesar's wife's nightmare. Most dramatically, in the pre-dawn hours of March 15th, Caesar's wife Calpurnia was awakened by nightmares. She dreamed of holding her husband's bloodied body, or in another version, of a statue of Caesar spouting blood like a fountain, and Romans washing their hands in it. She dreamed the roof of their house collapsed, and her husband lay dead in her arms. She woke up screaming. These dreams rattled her deeply. Calpurnia begged Caesar not to leave the house that day. She was not a woman given to superstition normally, but this night's visions overcame her. "Do not go to the Senate meeting," she pleaded. "Stay home. Say you are ill." It was still early morning, gray light barely seeping in. Caesar, who was not much swayed by omens typically, saw how upset Calpurnia was and decided, to ease her mind, that he would oblige her. Why not? He could always meet the Senate another day. So, perhaps to Calpurnia's surprise, he agreed. Very well, if it will make you feel easier, my love, I will not go today. Relieved, Calpurnia embraced him. Immediately, Caesar sent a message to Antony, or to the Senate directly, that he was indisposed and the session should be postponed. Thus, as morning advanced, the plan seemed at risk of unraveling. The senators assembled at the theater of Pompey, and among them the conspirators were awaiting Caesar's arrival at the Curia. But word arrived that Caesar wasn't coming. He was staying home. In the portico and gardens of Pompey's complex, senators milled about uncertainly. When this news reached the conspirators, it caused momentary panic. Cassius turned pale. Was their plot discovered? Would soldiers arrive any minute to arrest them all? They clustered together in twos and threes, whispering. Brutus kept a level head. He pointed out that if Caesar had discovered the conspiracy, they'd already be facing much more than a message of, "I'm staying home." More likely, Caesar truly was ill or worried about something else, perhaps those omens. But if Caesar did not come to the Senate, they had a big problem. They couldn't easily get at him in his villa, guarded by slaves and possibly soldiers. And time was critical. In just days, Caesar was set to leave Rome for his military expedition. Their window to act was closing. One conspirator even suggested, in that moment of desperation, that they simply go to Caesar's house and do the deed there. But that was deemed impossible. His house was well secured, and an outright assault would turn into a messy battle, hardly the image of senatorial justice they wanted. They needed Caesar to come out voluntarily to a place where they could reach him. It was Decimus Brutus who saved the plan. Decimus stood up. Perhaps they had huddled in a semicircular bench or under a portico and said effectively, "Leave it to me. I will go to Caesar's house and persuade him to come. He'll listen to me." Everyone knew Caesar held Decimus in high esteem. If anyone could cajole him out today, it was Decimus. The conspirators agreed. So Decimus Brutus hurried off with a small entourage across the city to the Julian villa. At Caesar's home, Calpurnia was warily delighted that her husband was remaining home. She supervised as Caesar's attendants prepared to send formal word canceling the Senate meeting. Perhaps Caesar was in a robe, unarmored and relaxed, thinking he'd spend a rare day at leisure or working on paperwork. Then Decimus Brutus arrived. As a close friend, Decimus was admitted immediately. Decimus found Caesar possibly still unbelted, maybe even in his slippers. Calpurnia was likely at Caesar's side, unwilling to let him out of her sight that morning. Caesar greeted Decimus warmly. He was surely surprised to see him. Decimus put on an easy smile. "I've come to check on you, Caesar. The Senate is gathering and worried you're not well." Caesar likely sighed and explained that Calpurnia had a terrible dream and fears for him to go out. "I decided it's best to stay home today," Caesar said gently, perhaps holding Calpurnia's hand. Decimus listened with all apparent sympathy. But he had a job to do. He replied with a friendly chuckle and a gentle chiding tone. "Caesar, by the love of the gods, do not say that. Are you going to pay attention to a woman's dream and the omens of foolish men?" Calpurnia bristled. "Foolish men? You dare call the priests foolish?" she might have retorted. Decimus raised his palms soothingly. He then took a different tack, one based on Caesar's pride. Lowering his voice, Decimus confided, "The Senate has prepared to honor you today. They plan to vote on granting you further powers, even to declare you king of the provinces, just not within Italy. If you fail to show up, out of fear or any reason, why they might change their minds." This was a lie, or at least a gross exaggeration. Some senators had talked informally about granting Caesar royal titles for outside Rome, but it wasn't on the agenda formally that day. Still, Decimus knew Caesar's psyche. Caesar despised cowardice and loved honors. He continued, now in a slightly goading tone, "What will your enemies say? That the great Julius Caesar hid at home because his wife had bad dreams? They'll laugh. And the senators who are waiting, many traveled to attend today, will be disappointed. Some may even think you slighted them by canceling. They might interpret it as you doubting their loyalty, or worse, that you put superstition above your duty. Caesar frowned. He was sensitive to slights against his courage. Seeing this, Decimus pressed further. Besides, if you send word you are sick, might it not spark rumors? People might think you're ill in mind as well as body. No, Caesar, better to go and dismiss this fear. Calpurnia's vision, while concerning, can be addressed by a quick visit to the Senate and then return home. Come for just a short while. The Senate will take it as a mark of respect. You can even dismiss early if you wish. We will be with you. I'll be right by your side the entire time. Calpurnia, tears in her eyes, pleaded with Caesar again. Please, tell Decimus he's wrong. Let's send Antony to adjourn the Senate. You don't need more honors. You have enough. Stay for my sake, just this once. She might have even knelt before him, begging. Caesar was torn. He looked at Calpurnia's anguish, then at Decimus's earnest, concerned face. Decimus then delivered the final prompt, perhaps feigning offense on behalf of the Senate. Caesar, the senators and the Curia are your friends. They have given you everything. Would you snub them on this day set aside to celebrate you? What will they think? That you suspect them? That you fear some plot? There is no safer place for you than surrounded by the Senate's love. This was a clever inversion of the truth, and it worked. Caesar exhaled and stood. Enough, he said. I have been acting foolishly. He assured Calpurnia gently. My dear, these omens, how often they're wrong. I'll go, finish the meeting quickly, and be back before midday. Calpurnia was not convinced. She tried to insist he at least delay to another auspicious hour. But Decimus, seeing Caesar's resolve returning, seized the moment. Let's not keep the Senate waiting longer, shall we? Calpurnia, desperate, said she would accompany him, or at least begged him to be wary. Caesar perhaps embraced her and promised to be careful. He then readied himself in his senatorial toga and laurel crown. As Caesar's entourage got ready to depart, another friend came with a warning. Literally, a warning in hand. Artemidorus of Cnidus, a Greek teacher and philosopher who had connections with many politicians, had somehow caught wind of the conspiracy. Some say he was approached by a conspirator who wanted him to join, or he overheard talk. He certainly was friendly with many of them. Realizing Caesar was in mortal danger, Artemidorus wrote out a warning on a scroll listing by name several key conspirators and hinting at their plan. Early that morning, he managed to position himself along Caesar's route to the Senate. As Caesar proceeded through the streets on foot or in his open litter, surrounded by people handing petitions, Artemidorus stepped forward. He extended his scroll and said urgently, Caesar, read this immediately. It concerns you personally. Caesar, in the press of the crowd, took the folded paper. One of the conspirators, perhaps Decimus or Cassius, saw this and no doubt broke into a cold sweat. What was that message? Would Caesar read it in time? According to Plutarch, Caesar attempted to read Artemidorus's petition then and there, but was jostled by people pushing other papers at him with cries of, "Read mine first, Caesar." The hubbub of public petitioners was overwhelming. Caesar, holding Artemidorus's paper along with others, was said to have murmured, "What touches us personally shall be read last." He tucked it among the documents and continued moving. Thus, the vital warning remained unread, a last-minute thread of fate that might have saved him, but did not. It was mid-morning when Caesar arrived at the theater of Pompey. The sun had come out weakly after a drizzly dawn. In the open plaza, a crowd had formed. People hoping to see Caesar or conduct business once the Senate session ended. Among them was Spurina, the soothsayer. As Caesar passed, he actually called out to Spurina in a lightly jesting tone, "Well, Spurina, the Ides of March have come," implying, "Here we are, nothing bad has happened to me yet." Spurina, a man of dark warnings, replied evenly, "Aye, they have come, but they are not gone. Caesar shrugged off the response with a smile and moved on. Those nearby who overheard shivered at the portent. The Senate meeting was to take place not in the main theater, but a smaller annex, the Curia Pompeiana, Pompey's Senate house, a rectangular hall with rows of benches. Overseeing the hall, as if presiding, was a large statue of Pompey himself, placed there years before. At the base of this statue, soon, the great Julius Caesar would lie bleeding. As Caesar approached the entrance, Mark Antony joined him, presumably after discussing something with Trebonius outside, not knowing Trebonius was deliberately engaging him. Dozens of senators filed in with Caesar. The conspirators tightened their circle. Each had hidden his dagger in the fold of his toga, trying to keep a calm face. Still, there was a moment of suspense that nearly went awry. A senator named Popilius Lena, who was not part of the conspiracy but apparently suspected something, leaned in and whispered to Cassius, "I wish you success in your enterprise today." Cassius blanched. Was their plot known? Immediately, the conspirators exchanged nervous looks. Some even contemplated aborting if Popilius were about to blow their cover. Popilius then strolled up to Caesar and engaged him in conversation, smiling. Cassius gripped his dagger under his robe, ready to stab Popilius right there if he uttered a word of betrayal. Brutus watched tensely. But after a minute, Caesar nodded to Popilius, and the senator walked away, having said nothing alarming. Cassius and Brutus realized Popilius was wishing them well, but would not interfere. He knew, but he would keep silent. This gave them a strange boost of confidence. Even those outside their circle felt Caesar must die. Now Caesar walked into the chamber and took his seat. By custom, senators rose in greeting. Caesar scanned the room. Perhaps he noticed some familiar faces were missing. Lepidus, for instance, was not there. Lepidus was with troops outside the city. The atmosphere was normal enough. The conspirators moved into positions around him, mingling with other senators so as not to form an obvious cluster. The Curia of Pompey was not enormous. It could hold maybe a few hundred people at most. Polished stone floors, columns along the sides, the looming statue of Pompey at the head. Caesar's gilded chair was set near that statue on a dais. He sat, and the senators sat. Decimus, Brutus, and Cassius flanked him closely. Others, Casca, Cimber, Brutus, were just steps away, interspersed with unaware senators who had no inkling of what was to come. The presiding consul, either Caesar himself or maybe an associate, began addressing routine matters. But within minutes, the conspirators launched their plan. Tullius Cimber stood up with a petition in hand. This was the agreed signal. He approached Caesar as if with an urgent request. Others in on the plot rose too, ostensibly to second Cimber's plea or add their own petitions, but really to surround Caesar in a tight throng. Cimber implored Caesar to revoke the exile of his brother. This was a matter Caesar had already denied previously. As Cimber pressed the paper at him, Caesar grew annoyed. He waved him off. Not now. That matter is settled. The conspirators pressed closer under the guise of support. At that moment, some later recounted, Cassius cast a quick, beseeching glance at Pompey's statue towering above, perhaps a silent prayer to the spirit of Pompey to aid their endeavor. Though Cassius was not religious, the weight of the moment drove him to that superstitious gesture, invoking Pompey as if the old general's ghost might approve this revenge taking place at his feet. Cimber, refusing to be dismissed, suddenly grabbed hold of Caesar's toga. He yanked it downward, exposing Caesar's neck and shoulders. Caesar, astonished at such boldness, jerked back in his seat and cried, "Why, this is violence, ista quidem vis est," in Latin. That was the cue. From behind, Publius Casca drew his dagger. His heart must have been pounding. He raised the blade and struck at Caesar's neck, the first blow of the Ides of March. Casca was nervous. Instead of a fatal stab, he landed only a glancing slice at Caesar's shoulder or neck, causing a shallow wound. Caesar, not fatally hurt yet, sprang up with a roar, grabbing Casca's forearm. Caesar was strong, an experienced soldier still in his mid-50s, vigorous and tall. He bellowed in Latin, "Casca, you villain, what are you doing?" Casca, in panic at Caesar's grappling, shouted in Greek to his brother, "Adelphe, Bothe, brother, help me." All hell broke loose in that instant. Casca's shout signaled the rest to attack. Swords flashed out from under togas. The conspirators rushed at Caesar from all sides. Servilius Casca, Publius's brother, lunged in and stabbed Caesar in the side. Other knives thrust toward Caesar's face, chest, and back. Caesar managed to shove Cimber away and twist around. He even had the presence of mind to draw his stylus, a writing pen of metal, and use it as a makeshift dagger. He drove the stylus into Casca's arm that had struck him, drawing a cry of pain from Casca. But now, Caesar was surrounded by a ring of blades. Cassius slashed Caesar across the face, cutting him just below the eye. Decimus Brutus drove his dagger into Caesar's thigh from the side. Another unknown blade stabbed Caesar between the ribs from behind. The senators who were not part of the conspiracy stood in shock for a heartbeat, then pandemonium. Some thought it was a sudden argument turned violent, but when they saw multiple men stabbing the seated dictator, they understood. A few yelled in terror. Most ran. The entire assembly erupted in screams and the scuffle of sandals on marble as senators bolted for the doors. Caesar fought for his life, attempting to wrench away the attacker's arms. One account says he threw one man aside with great force, but there were too many assailants and no one came to Caesar's aid. Even those not in the conspiracy were too stunned or afraid to intervene. The attackers themselves were in a frenzy, stabbing wildly. They even cut one another in their fury. Cassius received a wound to the hand. Brutus was scraped on the leg by a friend's blade. Later, one conspirator would joke darkly that they had all acted like surgeons. Everyone wanted to cut, and some cuts missed the mark. Within half a minute, Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times. As he tried to stagger away, perhaps intending to move toward the door or toward Pompey's statue, he tripped or was knocked down. Blood was flowing freely now. Several deep wounds had been inflicted, one likely puncturing a lung. Caesar, dazed and weakening, looked up and saw Marcus Junius Brutus looming with dagger drawn. It said Caesar's next words were in Greek, whispered, "Kai su teknon? You too, my child?" Some sources say he said nothing at all, only a gasp. But the sight of Brutus among the murderers struck Caesar to his core. Here was the man he perhaps loved most, delivering a death blow. At that moment, something in Caesar yielded. He stopped struggling. He gathered the top of his toga and pulled it over his head and down to cover the lower part of his body as well, a final act of dignity to ensure he fell decently, not with limbs akimbo or face exposed. Plutarch notes that Caesar did this the instant he saw Brutus's blade, almost resigning himself to the end. The conspirators closed in, continuing to stab even as Caesar collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue. Only a low groan escaped Caesar's lips after the first strikes. He gave up no ghostly final monologue, no curse, just silence, aside from that possible reproach to Brutus. In Shakespeare's imagination, he said, "Et tu, Brute, then fall, Caesar." Real history suggests it was more wordless, a wounded man drawing his garment over his face and sinking under a rain of blows. And then it was done. Caesar lay motionless, bleeding out on the cold floor, his toga soaked red, his body pierced by dozens of wounds. The statue of Pompey loomed above, said to be splattered with Caesar's blood, as if Pompey himself had a hand in this retribution. For a heartbeat, everyone in the Curia stood frozen. The assassins themselves were panting, wide-eyed with the enormity of what they'd done. Most of the other senators had fled in a panic, some even jumping out of windows or scrambling over each other to escape. A hush fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the conspirators and the echo of distant footfalls in the portico. The conspirators looked at one another in astonishment. They had done it. Cassius's hand dripped blood. from his own cut or Caesar's. Brutus's face was splashed with gore. All were spattered on arms and clothing. For a second, perhaps, none spoke. Then a voice, maybe Cassius or Brutus, rang out. Liberty! Freedom! The tyrant is dead! Some conspirators raised their daggers high, showing the blood to onlookers as if to say, See? See what we have done for Rome? Brutus stepped forward, trying to address the stunned remnants of the Senate in the hall. He may have said something like, Senators, do not be afraid. Ambition's debt is paid. We have struck down a tyrant. Not a man here will be harmed. But he spoke mostly to empty air. The Senate benches were largely deserted, their occupants in full flight. The handful remaining were too shaken to respond and quickly edged away. Realizing the senators had scattered, Brutus and Cassius now turned their focus outward. They needed to control the public narrative immediately. Raising their voices and their weapons, they marched out of the Curia into the open air of the theater complex. Decimus's gladiators, who had been stationed just outside as a precaution, closed in protectively to ensure no loyalist forces interfered. Upon exiting, the group of 60 or so conspirators called out to the startled populace in the portico, People of Rome, we are once again free! They waved their daggers, still wet with Caesar's blood, and some even held up parts of Caesar's torn toga. It was a shocking spectacle. Onlookers backed away in fear or stood in dumb amazement. A few, who grasped the significance or who hated Caesar, might have cheered weakly, but by and large, there was not an immediate eruption of joy that the conspirators had expected. The city had loved Caesar, especially the lower classes. News that Caesar is dead, murdered by senators, raced through the streets, and with it came uncertainty and terror. People didn't yet know if this was a good thing or a calamity. Many assumed chaos would follow, perhaps civil war again. So the general public reaction was to shutter doors and stay inside, not to run out and celebrate. The conspirators realized they needed a secure stronghold to regroup. They knew Mark Antony and Lepidus had legions that might move against them swiftly, so they decided to head for the Capitoline Hill, the traditional citadel of Rome. The Capitoline, with its Temple of Jupiter, was defensible. A few ramps and stairs could be blocked to hold off attackers. Decimus's band of gladiators escorted them. Blood-stained and adrenalized, the liberators moved through the streets shouting slogans of liberty, yet they met mostly silence or screams as people hurried away. It wasn't the triumphant procession they had envisioned. Back in the Senate house, Julius Caesar's body lay abandoned for some time. Finally, 3 of his slaves or trusted attendants, who had waited in an antechamber, ventured in. Finding his corpse, they wept and carefully lifted him onto a litter. One arm dangled lifelessly over the side as they carried him out. The men bore their fallen patron back towards his home on the Palatine Hill, likely taking a longer, quieter route to avoid the gathering crowds and commotion. As they went, some onlookers couldn't believe their eyes. Julius Caesar, the mighty conqueror, being carried home dead, his purple robes drenching the ground with blood along the way. Calpurnia, at home, already had a dreadful sense of foreboding. Some say she had sent messengers to the Senate to check on Caesar, and hearing distant cries from that direction, she was nearly frantic with worry. When the door burst open and Caesar's body was brought in, Calpurnia's worst nightmare literally lay before her. She wailed, an indescribable sound of grief. We can imagine her collapsing beside Caesar's limp form, perhaps draping herself over him, her tears mingling with his blood. Servants stood by sobbing. Some tore their hair in despair. Calpurnia might have cried out to the gods, asking why they didn't heed her prayers and warnings. Meanwhile, at the Capitoline Hill, Brutus and Cassius convened their fellow conspirators at the Temple of Jupiter. They were elated but also anxious. They didn't flee Rome. Importantly, they considered themselves liberators, not criminals, and thus expected to be treated as heroes once the initial shock wore off. From the Capitoline, they sent heralds to summon any remaining senators to join them. A few sympathetic senators, like Cicero, cautiously approached the hill, though Cicero himself did not immediately ascend. He hadn't been part of it and wasn't sure if he'd be welcome or if the people would kill all aristocrats now. Mark Antony, for his part, had initially been waylaid by Trebonius outside the Senate at the critical moment. Trebonius, true to plan, had drawn Antony into a conversation at the portico, just as Cimber made the first move. When Antony heard the commotion, the screams and shouting, he tried to rush inside, but Trebonius likely grabbed his arm. By the time Antony realized what was happening, the deed was done, and the assassins were surging out. Antony, a soldier at heart, instantly understood that he would be the next target if the conspirators caught him. He yanked free from Trebonius and, abandoning the idea of fighting 60 men alone, fled. He ran through side streets and took refuge in either a friend's house or disguised himself among the crowds. Eventually, he made his way to his own home and barricaded it. Antony knew that if Caesar, practically a god in Rome, could be cut down, he himself was in mortal peril until power was sorted out. Also that afternoon, Caesar's ally Lepidus reacted swiftly. Lepidus had a legion camped on the Campus Martius just outside the city walls. Upon hearing of the assassination, Lepidus moved his troops into Rome, occupying the Forum and key streets with soldiers. His men gathered near the Temple of the Earth, where they knew the senators, including conspirators, had planned to meet later or the next day. Effectively, Lepidus was positioning himself to protect Caesar's legacy, or to position himself as a force to be reckoned with in the power vacuum. By evening on March 15th, Rome was in a strange state. The conspirators held the Capitoline Hill, well armed and relatively safe for the moment. Antony held Caesar's papers, will, and treasury at his house. He managed to secure them before they could be seized. Lepidus held the streets with his soldiers. The Senate was paralyzed with fear and uncertainty, and the Roman people were swinging between outrage, grief, and confusion. The conspirators expected that by the next morning, the Senate would officially praise their action and ratify the tyrannicide. They even thought the people might thank them. To their surprise, as night fell, they heard only quiet sobs of mourning from the city below and murmurs of anger. Rome did not erupt in joyous celebration. Instead, it trembled on the edge of chaos. Cicero did make his cautious way up to the Capitoline to meet the assassins that night. Though not invited to the conspiracy, he was sympathetic to its aims. He found Brutus, Cassius, and the rest exultant, but also nervous. "We did not plan beyond this," Brutus admitted. Cicero reportedly advised them to call the Senate to the Capitoline at first light and make a public justification. But also, Cicero realized something the conspirators did not. They should have eliminated Mark Antony. "You've sown the dragon's teeth," he muttered, "and they will sprout armed men." For now, though, Antony remained hidden, and the liberators enjoyed a brief feeling of victory. That night, Rome was filled with laments. At Caesar's house, Calpurnia kept vigil by her husband's body. According to one story, she was so overcome with grief she could not speak, merely rocking and moaning softly. Cleopatra, in her villa across the Tiber, shuddered at the news. She feared not only for Caesar, who was now gone, but for herself and her son. Quickly and quietly, Cleopatra prepared to flee the city. Within days, she would be on her way back to Egypt with little Caesarion, sensing that Rome was no longer safe for them now that her powerful patron was dead. Morning of March 16th brought negotiations. Surprisingly, Brutus and Cassius did not try to seize power or attack their rivals further. They truly believed their role was done, that the Senate, now free of Caesar, would naturally resume governing the Republic. They sent word to Antony that they meant him no harm and hoped to reach an understanding. Antony, shrewd, didn't trust them, but he emerged from hiding cautiously to engage in talks through intermediaries. Over the next 2 days, March 16 to 17, a remarkable compromise was reached, brokered by Cicero and others. The Senate convened, not in the Senate House, still sullied with blood, but at the Temple of Jupiter Stator, or perhaps the Temple of Earth, accounts vary, a neutral location. Brutus and Cassius, for their safety, did not attend in person. They remained on the Capitoline but communicated via emissaries. Antony and Lepidus attended, backed by their armed forces looming. Antony surprised many by not taking immediate revenge. Instead, he proposed a deal. Caesar's assassins would be granted amnesty, no legal punishment, and in return, all of Caesar's acts and appointments would remain valid. This was a political masterstroke. It appeased the Caesarian faction by preserving Caesar's laws, his wills, his grants, thus stability for their side, and it placated the assassins with safety, treating the deed as perhaps done for the Republic's benefit. Cicero and the majority of the Senate, desperate to avoid another civil war, quickly agreed. They even voted to approve Caesar's will being executed and to give him a full state funeral in a few days. Brutus and Cassius were to have their lives and offices preserved. They would even be provincial governors in a few years, as Caesar had planned for them. On the surface, it was reconciliation. That the conspirators accepted this compromise might seem odd. They'd wanted Caesar's acts overturned. For instance, they hated many of his populist laws. But Brutus especially believed in peace over vendetta. He was satisfied that they had ended Caesar's life. He had no wish to further punish Caesar's followers or undo everything Caesar did. Perhaps in their idealism, they thought this magnanimity would win over the people. The Senate officially confirmed Caesar's title of dictator had ended with his death, obviously, and that no one would be prosecuted for killing him, essentially declaring it was not murder, but tyrannicide. But interestingly, they also declared Caesar's divine honors and reforms would continue, effectively saying Caesar was not a tyrant after all, or else his laws would be void. It was a delicate bit of legal fiction to keep everyone happy, and it earned Cicero's famous remark later, "They've slain the king but not the kingdom," noting the contradiction. Brutus and Cassius descended from the Capitoline on March 17th under this fragile truce. The city was still tense, but open fighting had been averted by compromise. The conspirators walked about freely again. Some people even cheered Brutus in the Forum that day, either out of genuine support or relief that civil war might have been averted. Cassius was less popular. He had a prickly reputation, but Brutus's name still carried admiration in some quarters. 2 days later, on March 19th, Caesar's will was unsealed and read publicly. It was a bombshell that dramatically swayed public sentiment. In his will, Julius Caesar posthumously adopted his grandnephew Gaius Octavius, the 18-year-old son of his niece, as his son and primary heir. This young man, now Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, was to inherit 3/4 of Caesar's estate and take Caesar's name. Decimus Brutus and a few others were named secondary heirs should Octavius die without issue. But equally important to the Roman masses were Caesar's gifts. He left a sum of 300 sesterces to every Roman citizen, a generous gift, equivalent to a worker's a few months' pay. He also left his magnificent gardens across the Tiber to be a public park for the people. When the will was read in the Forum, a wave of emotion swept the crowd. They realized Caesar, tyrant or not, had loved them, the common people, enough to remember each and every one of them in his will. "Caesar has left us money," people exclaimed in amazement. Already many had felt sorrow at his death. Now gratitude and anger at the assassins' ingratitude welled up. The conspirators had wanted to be seen as saviors of Rome, but after hearing the will, many in the public saw them as traitors who killed their benefactor. Sensing this turn of the tide, Brutus and Cassius quietly left Rome a few days later, under the pretext of fulfilling some official duties or withdrawing for their own safety. They realized the city was no longer friendly to them. People scrawled curses on walls. Brutus, you killed your father, and calling the assassins parricides, father killers. It was time to go. Brutus headed for Italy's countryside and eventually toward the east, where he would gather provincial support. Cassius did likewise. The climax of public unrest came on March 20th, 44 BC, the day of Julius Caesar's funeral. A massive crowd gathered in the Forum Romanum. Atop the rostra, the speaker's platform, Caesar's gilded coffin, or bier, was displayed. Mark Antony, as the surviving consul and Caesar's loyal lieutenant, was to deliver the funeral oration. Brutus and Cassius wisely stayed away. In fact, by this time they were likely outside the city. But one assassin, perhaps unwisely, did attend. Decimus Brutus was present, according to some sources, though keeping a low profile. Antony's eulogy started measured and formal. He enumerated Caesar's deeds, his conquests, his clemency to enemies, pointedly mentioning, perhaps, how he pardoned some of the very men who then killed him. He praised Caesar's generosity, reading parts of the will to the crowd. To every citizen, Caesar left 75 drachmas, 75 Roman denarii being roughly 300 sesterces. The people murmured in wonder, many already tearful. As Antony saw the crowd moved by sentiment, he stoked the fire. He lifted Caesar's blood-stained toga for all to see. It had been pierced through by daggers, shredded and still spattered dark with drying blood. He showed each rent. Here is where Cassius struck. Here, look, this is Brutus's cruel cut, he cried, pointing at one large tear when he plunged his dagger into Caesar. At the mention of names and the visualization of the violence, the crowd grew agitated, cries of anger rising. Antony held nothing back. He called the assassins ingrates, who spilled benefactors' blood. The tension in the forum built like a brewing storm. Antony then likely read out more from Caesar's honors, and perhaps from a document. Some say he publicly read out decrees granting Caesar titles like Father of the Country and Benefactor, which the Senate had voted, highlighting the conspirators' hypocrisy in murdering such a man. For a finishing touch, he invoked the gods and called down curses on the murderers. Or perhaps quoted some stirring lines. Shakespeare imagines Antony showing Caesar's wounds as poor, dumb mouths, pleading for justice. Finally, the crowd could be contained no more. First came sorrowful wailing. People mourned Caesar sincerely, many tearing their clothing or shouting his name. Then came fury. Someone in the throng raised a cry to burn the body in the forum itself, a spontaneous, almost riotous suggestion. Normally, cremations were outside the city on the Campus Martius. In an instant, this idea caught fire. The crowd piled wooden benches, tables, anything they could find, and made an impromptu funeral pyre right there in the forum. They gently placed Caesar's body upon it and lit the flames. As the conflagration rose, the crowd's mood turned into a mob's rage. They grabbed torches from the pyre and surged through the streets looking for the assassins' houses. Brutus's and Cassius's residences were targeted. Windows were broken, doors battered. The conspirators weren't home. They were likely far away by then, so the mob, frenzied, attacked whoever they thought was complicit. In one tragic episode, they encountered Cinna the poet, a friend of Caesar's, who happened unfortunately to share the name Cinna with one of the assassins, Cornelius Cinna. The mob, not discerning the difference, tore the poor poet to pieces on the street when he nervously said he was Cinna, and they thought he meant the assassin Cinna. This incident, the mistaken lynching of the wrong Cinna, showed the terrifying bloodlust unleashed. They also marched to the Senate House, the Curia Pompei, site of the murder, and set it on fire. The Senate House where Caesar fell was burned to ashes by angry citizens, as if to purify the stain or to symbolically destroy the scene of the Republic's murder of its champion. The great statue of Pompey that stood there somehow survived the blaze. It would later be moved by Augustus to a safer location, as if even he, Caesar's heir, respected that eerie artifact. Rome was in chaos that night. Antony and Lepidus deployed soldiers to restore order, but in truth, the violence burned itself out after a day or so. The conspirators were gone or in hiding. Their cause, persuading Romans that Caesar's death was a noble act, was utterly lost in those flames and riots. The republic they hoped to revive slipped further away than ever. In the weeks and months that followed, Mark Antony took charge in Rome, leveraging the wave of sympathy for Caesar. He reached out to Caesar's young heir Octavian, who was in Greece and soon would travel to Italy to claim his inheritance. Antony at first probably underestimated Octavian, thinking to use him as a figurehead maybe. Lepidus was named Pontifex Maximus, high priest, in Caesar's stead and aligned with Antony, stationing his legions as a threat over the Senate. Brutus and Cassius, for their part, drifted east to gather support. They were assigned by a Senate desperate to get them far from the city, provinces in the east, Syria and Macedonia. Over the next year and more, they would amass an army, rallying those still loyal to the old Republican cause and using the wealth of eastern cities to fund a military force. Decimus Brutus went north to Cisalpine Gaul, which was his assigned province as of that year, 44 BC. He took command of legions there. Legions that were formerly Caesar's but now obeyed Decimus due to legality of appointment. Decimus's position would soon put him in direct conflict with Mark Antony. Cicero, who had initially lauded the assassins, "Our heroes," he called them in letters shortly after the Ides, quickly realized that the liberatores had bungled the aftermath. Cicero tried to influence the young Octavian, who arrived in April, to side with the Senate against Antony. A complex dance of alliances ensued. Octavian, Caesar's heir, just 18 but shrewd beyond his years, won over many of Caesar's veterans to his own cause by emphasizing his name and paying out Caesar's bequests to the people from his own funds. The Senate, increasingly wary of Antony's power, allied with Octavian for a time in 43 BC. Brutus and Cassius from afar communicated with the Senate and were initially hopeful that Antony might be declared an outlaw. But power struggles in Rome continued relentlessly. By the end of 43 BC, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus reconciled their differences and formed the Second Triumvirate, a formal three-man dictatorship to restore order. Unlike the conspirators' loose alliance, these three had military might and legal sanction. They passed a law granting themselves extraordinary powers for 5 years. Immediately, they enacted proscriptions, a bloody purge of their enemies. Over 300 senators and 2,000 equestrian nobles were marked for death. This included, heartbreakingly, Cicero. Antony insisted on Cicero's death as payback for Cicero's Philippic speeches against him. Octavian, who owed Cicero some loyalty for support, nonetheless acquiesced to Antony's demand. Cicero tried to flee Italy, but Antony's men caught him on December 7th, 43 BC. In a grim scene, Cicero bared his neck to the soldiers and was executed. Antony's wife Fulvia, who detested Cicero, allegedly took his severed head and jabbed the tongue with her hairpin, a last vicious insult to the orator's power of speech. Cicero's hands, that penned the speeches, and head were displayed on the rostra, where Cicero had so often enthralled the public with his eloquence. The sight appalled even many hardened Romans. Brutus and Cassius, hearing of the proscriptions, must have realized that their hopes for a restored republic were truly dead. The triumvirs then turned their sights on them, the liberators, now labeled as traitors and targets to avenge Caesar. In the spring of 42 BC, Brutus and Cassius commanded a formidable combined army in the eastern provinces, nearly 20 legions filled with seasoned troops, including remnants of Pompey's old forces and others sympathetic to them, or simply under their pay. They also controlled the wealthy cities of the east, which provided funds. That October of 42 BC, the final showdown occurred in Macedonia, near the city of Philippi. Antony and Octavian brought a similarly large army from the west to confront Brutus and Cassius. Two battles were fought in close succession. In the first battle of Philippi, Brutus commanded the Republican left wing facing Octavian and Cassius the right facing Antony. Brutus's forces actually routed Octavian's, storming Octavian's camp. Octavian himself was ill and not on the field. He narrowly avoided capture by Brutus's soldiers. Meanwhile, however, on the other flank, Antony overwhelmed Cassius's legions and captured Cassius's camp. Cassius, seeing dust and confusion and misinterpreting one crucial signal, he thought Brutus had been defeated on his side because he could not see Brutus's victorious troops through the haze, fell into despair. A skilled general, Cassius was undone by momentary lack of information. Believing all was lost, Cassius retreated to a small hill. There, with only a few followers, Cassius ordered his freedman Pindorus to assist him in suicide. Cassius covered his face as Pindorus, with trembling hands, drew a sword, the same sword Cassius had used against Caesar, some say, and stabbed his master, killing Cassius instantly. Cassius's last words were supposedly, "Julius Caesar, thou art avenged with this same sword that killed thee." He died not knowing that on the other wing, Brutus had actually been victorious. Brutus was heartbroken when messengers from the other wing found him after the first battle and informed him that Cassius, misunderstanding the day's outcome, had killed himself. Brutus called Cassius the last of the Romans, grieving deeply that such a man died due to a mistake. Now Brutus assumed sole command. They paused, each army regrouping rather than pressing the fight to a finish, and engaged in negotiations and minor skirmishes for a couple of weeks. During that lull, Brutus, so sources say, saw a dreadful phantom in his tent late one night, the ghost of Caesar perhaps, which said to him, "We shall meet again at Philippi." Brutus, though shaken, steeled himself. The end was near, one way or another. On October 23, 42 BC, the Second Battle of Philippi erupted. It was bloody and decisive. This time, Antony, the more skilled general among the triumvirs, managed to flank Brutus's forces and Octavian's legions, motivated by vengeance and possibly by promises of rewards, held firm. Brutus's army was thoroughly defeated. His lines collapsed. As the rout unfolded, Brutus fled into nearby hills with a handful of loyal friends. Realizing the cause was lost, Brutus resolved not to be captured, knowing that capture would mean public humiliation and execution. He spoke to his few remaining companions, thanking them and citing a line from Greek tragedy. "Virtue, I have followed you through life, and I find you are but a shadow." In that poignant moment, he acknowledged that his high ideals had led to ruin, that the virtue he worshipped was an illusion compared to the hard realities of power. With stoic composure, Brutus asked one of his friends, Strato, to hold out a sword. Brutus impaled himself on the blade, or in some accounts, Strato helped him drive it home. "Farewell, good Strato," Brutus said. "Caesar, now be still. I killed not thee with half so good a will." At least, Shakespeare imagines those as his final words. The historical Brutus likely said little, merely collapsing into death. Thus died Marcus Brutus. He was around 43 years old. By his order, Strato later made sure Brutus's body was treated honorably and sent to his mother Servilia in Italy for burial. Antony, finding Brutus's corpse, did indeed treat it with respect. He draped Brutus's body in a fine cloak and ordered it not be mutilated. When Antony learned that Brutus had died by his own hand, he is said to have declared, "Of all the Romans of this time, this was the noblest." Antony recognized that Brutus, whatever one thought of his cause, acted out of what he believed to be virtue and not out of envy or greed. The other conspirators who survived the Ides met similarly grim fates. Decimus Brutus, after Philippi, had attempted to hold out in Gaul against Antony's forces. Earlier in 43 BC, Decimus had been trapped by Antony during the Mutina campaign. Though Antony was momentarily defeated at Mutina by Octavian and the consuls, Decimus's side technically won that battle. Decimus found his legions melting away afterward, unwilling to fight fellow Caesarians. By the end of 43 BC, Decimus was a fugitive. He was captured by a Gallic chieftain loyal to Antony and executed, reportedly decapitated, his head sent to Antony, a grim echo of Pompey's fate. Caius Trebonius, back in early 43 BC, had become governor of Asia. A staunch Caesarian general named Dolabella, ironically one who had once been aligned with the conspirators then switched loyalty, attacked Trebonius in Smyrna. Trebonius was captured and brutally killed. He became the first of the assassins to fall, mere months after the deed. Tullius Cimber disappears from record around the time of Philippi, presumably killed in that final conflict. Ligarius and Turullius and others were hunted down by Octavian's forces in subsequent years. Turullius, who had helped Cassius build ships, was captured in 31 BC and executed on the island of Kos. Cassius Parmensis, known as the last surviving conspirator, fled after Philippi and roamed for years. He joined Sextus Pompey's rebellion for a while and later allied with Antony. After Antony's defeat, Parmensis was in Athens. Octavian's men finally caught him in 30 BC and executed him. With his death, every conspirator was gone. Even Portia, Brutus's widow, could not escape tragedy. Hearing of Brutus's suicide, she allegedly killed herself in Rome, famously, if apocryphally, by swallowing hot coals, as she was kept under guard and could use no weapon. True or not, that story of Portia's end symbolized how deeply the old Republican nobility were devastated by the triumph of Caesar's heirs. Thus, by 30 BC, within 14 years of Caesar's assassination, the liberators were annihilated. Instead of reviving the Republic, their act had cleared the way for a single ruler more tenacious and eventually more subtle than Caesar, Octavian, who in 27 BC would be granted the august title of Augustus, becoming the first Roman emperor. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March 44 BC turned out to be the death knell of the Roman Republic, not its salvation. In killing Caesar, the aristocrats opened the door to an empire, to a system of monarchy that would last in the West for another 500 years, and in the East even longer. The ironies abound. The conspirators feared Caesar wanted to be king. He never got that title. But his adopted heir, Augustus, effectively became Rome's first monarch, though he wisely avoided the word rex. Augustus maintained the facade of republican institutions, but he held ultimate power over the army, the laws, and the treasury. The Senate continued to meet, but largely to rubber stamp Augustus's decisions. The Roman people, whom Brutus and Cassius thought would rejoice at being rid of a dictator, instead largely mourned Caesar and welcomed Augustus's firm hand. After decades of civil war and instability, Augustus's rule brought what is known as the Pax Romana, a relative peace that lasted 2 centuries. Under the emperors, Rome reached the height of its territorial expanse and cultural achievements. One could argue, from a pragmatic perspective, that Caesar's assassination only hastened what was perhaps inevitable, that the Roman state, ruling a vast empire, would need a single strong executive. The old republic managed a city-state. The new empire required an emperor. Yet, for centuries, Caesar's assassins were hailed by those devoted to republican virtue as tragic heroes. The senatorial aristocrats of subsequent eras, when it was safe to do so, sometimes whispered admiration for Brutus. The younger Marcus Junius Brutus became especially a symbol. Dante, writing in 1300s Italy with its city-state republics, placed Brutus and Cassius in hell, not because he personally hated them, but because medieval Christendom saw Caesar as a divinely appointed ruler. But Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers, on the other hand, often cast Brutus in a nobler light, a man who did a terrible deed for honorable ends. The assassin's deed also gave birth to enduring legends and cautionary tales. Caesar's name became synonymous with imperial power. Future Roman emperors took it as a title, Caesar Augustus. Even beyond Rome, Caesar evolved into words for king. The German Kaiser and the Russian Tsar derive from it. In that sense, the conspirators cemented Caesar's immortality. They eliminated the man, but not his legacy or name. The Ides of March entered cultural memory as a day of warning. Beware the Ides of March is now a proverbial phrase, thanks largely to Shakespeare, reminding people to be wary of looming threats, especially hidden ones among friends. Brutus became a byword for treachery. In many languages, to call someone a Brutus is to label them a betrayer of intimate trust. This is somewhat unfair to Brutus's complex motives, but it shows how powerful the image of Caesar's friend stabbing him became. Meanwhile, Marcus Antonius's funeral oration became the model of the power of rhetoric to sway a crowd, as immortalized by Shakespeare. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears is a line nearly everyone knows, capturing how Antony turned public opinion by carefully inciting their emotions. In the aftermath of Caesar's death, the Senate, in a somewhat pitiful attempt to placate all sides, officially deified Julius Caesar. In 42 BC, he was declared Divus Julius, the divine Julius, and a comet that had appeared during the games held in his honor shortly after his death, a great comet blazed for 7 days in the sky, was taken as confirmation that Caesar's soul had ascended to the heavens. The Julian star, as they called the comet, became a symbol on coins and monuments. Octavian heavily publicized this. He built a temple of Divus Julius in the Forum, and he himself adopted the title Divi Filius, son of the divine. So, the man whom Brutus and Cassius killed to prevent him from becoming a godlike king was literally made a god by the state, and his 18-year-old heir used that divine connection to secure an unassailable position. Fate's sense of humor, it seems, is dark indeed. One might ask, and people have asked for over 2 millennia, was the assassination of Julius Caesar justified? Was it right? Brutus wrote letters in the months after to supporters saying he regretted nothing except that Romans did not understand what they did. He truly believed he had struck down a tyrant for the sake of liberty. Cassius, too, in his final moments, thought he was replicating his ancestors' noble deed in defending Rome's freedom. They acted out of a combination of genuine republican idealism and personal grievances. Caesar was accumulating alarming powers and honors. In a way, the conspirators' fears were not unfounded. Caesar had brushed aside republican norms. Under his rule, elections were a sham, and Senate debates mere ceremony. If one valued the old order, Caesar looked every bit a tyrant in the making. However, what they perhaps failed to grasp was how much Rome had changed. The Republic had been eroding for decades. Powerful generals and demagogues had twisted it into dysfunction. The grievances of the common people, the ambitions of elites, the loyalty of armies shifting from state to generals, these were all factors that had already mortally wounded the Republic. Killing Caesar did not revive the Republic's spirit. It merely created a martyr and invited another cycle of civil war. In killing Caesar, the conspirators also overlooked the sentiment of the masses. They didn't have the broad public on their side. Perhaps they thought the public could be guided by the Senate's leadership once Caesar was gone. But the public loved Caesar more than they loved a dusty ideal of a Senate that often neglected them. We see echoes of this in many eras of history. A charismatic leader can capture hearts in a way an idea cannot. Brutus and Cassius were men of the senatorial aristocracy. They misjudged the bond between Caesar and the people, even if that bond was partially forged by populist policies and spectacle. Another layer to this event is the deeply personal one. It's a story not just of clashing ideals, but of betrayal. The conspirators were mostly men Caesar considered friends. He had forgiven them, elevated them, trusted them. Caesar's shock at seeing Brutus among his attackers remains one of the most heartbreaking elements of the tale. The phrase, et tu, Brute, even if apocryphal, has come to encapsulate the pain of being stabbed by one you love. In that respect, the Ides of March stands as perhaps the ultimate archetype in literature and history of betrayal. We remember Brutus not only for killing a ruler, but for betraying a friend. And we remember Caesar not only for being a dictator, but for being betrayed by someone he regarded as a son. History often balances on such emotional pivots. Had Brutus not been involved, had it been only Cassius and some malcontents, perhaps the public would have seen it as a baser crime. It was Brutus's noblesse and reputation that gave the conspiracy a sheen of righteousness. Yet, paradoxically, it's also Brutus's involvement that made it so poignant and tragic. Even those who hated Caesar might have winced at the thought of Brutus delivering the fatal cut. The Ides of March teach a sobering lesson. Political violence is unpredictable. The conspirators rid Rome of Julius Caesar, but in doing so, they unleashed forces, the mob's fury, the power vacuum, the opportunism of men like Antony and Octavian that led to outcomes opposite of what they sought. They traded the risk of one man's potential tyranny for the certainty of years of war and the rise of an even more unassailable autocracy. It is easy, with hindsight, to say the conspirators were foolish or short-sighted. But one should also acknowledge their courage, however misguided it turned out, in acting on principle as they understood it. Many of them, like Brutus, died holding to their ideals, however in vain. The tragic aspect is that their virtues, honor, patriotism, bravery, became instruments of tragedy when not tempered by pragmatism or broad support. In the aftermath, people in Rome gradually adjusted to the new reality. By 27 BC, Octavian Augustus formally restored the Republic's institutions, while actually holding supreme power behind the scenes. The Republic was over, but Augustus cleverly kept its shell. The Senate even became sycophantic. It asked Augustus's permission to do things, and it heaped him with titles. No one again tried to assassinate Augustus in the Senate. He died peacefully in his bed in 14 AD. The lesson of Caesar's murder possibly deterred others. Yes, you can kill a ruler, but can you control what happens next? Often the answer is no. For posterity, the story has been retold and re-examined countless times. Dante, as mentioned, damned Brutus and Cassius as arch-traitors. Shakespeare, writing in 1599, humanized them to a degree, portraying Brutus as a soul torn between love and duty, and Antony as a cunning avenger who outmaneuvers the honorable men, Shakespeare's dripping irony in Antony's speech. Shakespeare's Julius Caesar ends not with the restoration of the Republic, but with Antony and Octavian victorious, reflecting the historical outcome that power simply passed hands. It did not diffuse back to the many. In modern analyses, some see Caesar's assassination as the last gasp of a dying political system, a kind of therapeutic violence that failed because the patient, the Republic, was already terminal. Others more sympathetically call it a courageous stand for liberty, even if it failed. Certainly, it changed the course of world history. Had Caesar lived longer, perhaps he would have launched the Parthian War, maybe conquered more territory. Perhaps he would have found a way to pass power smoothly to someone, maybe Octavius, maybe his son, Caesarion, though Romans wouldn't accept Caesarion easily due to Cleopatra. Perhaps the civil war of Antony and Octavian might have been avoided or postponed. We cannot know. What we do know is that after Caesar's death, the Roman Republic was never the same. Within a few years, it had transformed into the Roman Empire. The Ides of March, which the conspirators hoped would be remembered as the day Rome was saved from tyranny, instead became a symbol of the danger of political idealism without planning, and of betrayal among intimates. Now the streets of ancient Rome are quiet again in our imagination. The torches are extinguished. The voices of that tumultuous time have faded. These events, however dramatic, live only in memory now. Let the struggles and sorrows of the Ides of March drift away like echoes in a distant forum. In this present moment, you are safe, and the lessons of history can gently inform our dreams without disturbing our peace. Good night and sleep well. In the theater of history, we have witnessed a great drama of pride and principle, how a group of well-intentioned men sought to alter the fate of their world with daggers, and how their deeds spiraled beyond their control. May the ghost of Julius Caesar now rest, and Brutus's conscience be at peace. Their story reminds us that the line between heroism and tragedy is thin, and that the consequences of our actions can be greater than we ever imagine. As you drift into slumber, let the images of Rome in 44 BC grow dim. The flicker of lamplight on marble, the hush after the tumult, the idea that even in great destinies, one finds human friendships and betrayals at the core. History has set down its verdict on the Ides of March. It was the day the Roman Republic died and an empire was born in blood. But now that tale is done. The lights in the Senate House are extinguished. The city of Rome falls silent under the stars, the smoke from Caesar's pyre curling into the night sky and disappearing among the constellations. May these old echoes lull rather than alarm, knowing that this drama is long past and that we, in the present, can find peace. Sleep now, with the assurance that even the greatest upheavals eventually settle into history and memory. The Ides of March are long gone. We have walked with Brutus and Caesar, seen ambitions and ideals collide. Let us leave them to rest in the pages of history. The world moves on, and so, in tranquility, do we, into a gentle night and hopeful dreams. Good night.